A recent fascination of the human race has been the thought of any form of extraterrestrial life. This topic has become very widespread in the past decade, and even more so in recent years, and even the last few months. With the launch of the James Webb Telescope, alleged government leaks, and efforts to visit Mars, the public's eye has been transfixed on what's known as the Fermi Paradox. There are many proposed solutions to the question, where are the aliens? And I've seen many explored here on YouTube, among other sites. But I've never found an answer that seemed to sit quite right with me. Most videos, articles, or shows all explore the topic of advanced alien civilization, and leave the question mostly unanswered. What I would like to do is interview some of the teachers that I had in high school, and ask them the big question, all in the hopes of gathering as much information as possible from the best sources that I have available to me. So that's exactly what I've done. Over an hour worth of interviews with 5 different teachers has left my opinions on the topic completely different from what they were before deciding to do this. My final conclusion based on all the evidence I'm about to present will be discussed at the end of the video. To understand how I came to the conclusion that I did, however, it'd be best to hear exactly what my teachers had to say first. In 5 sections, they'll try to explain some of the important factors that most people pondering the Fermi Paradox forgot to consider first. Section 1. Scale.
If I really had to guess,
my biggest thing is,
but in the end,
I do believe there's something out there.
I think that we're probably not the only living organisms in the universe.
I think there's other life out there. I think it's just improbable not to have other life.
I definitely say that too. I mean, just
There's
knowing.
just so many. There's just so many.
Yeah, we
In our
talk.
galaxy alone, it's ridiculous.
it's just so hard to believe that we would be the only beings or the only intelligent life in the universe.
I feel very narrow to consider elsewise.
Are we the lottery of life?
I fully believe that there's more stuff out there, but it is weird to me that there's not more concrete evidence, unless it's just not shared, which is probably the most realistic.
In terms of why we haven't connected or have found them,
It's because space is just too big.
If life is pervasive throughout the universe, what percentage of those living organisms actually evolve to what we would consider a higher state of consciousness or intelligence?
the way that the universe is expanding is so rapid that I don't think our technology perhaps is equivalent or matching up.
We certainly can't be the ones that have the best technology.
The universe is too big for aliens to travel anywhere.
We may not have the ability to, reach where they are at this point.
We're observing this from perhaps an incredibly rare circumstance where obviously we have intelligent life forms on this planet.
Again, I think it's preposterous to think that we're the only evolved life out there in terms of intelligence. Some days the news proves me wrong, but I think we, are limited in our scope if we just say that we're the best, the brightest, the most intelligent out there beyond.
Maybe we're getting a little ahead of ourselves trying to ask this question. We as a species aren't even 100% sure where life on our own planet comes from, which can have a big effect on the final conclusion.
We are unaware of the origins of life on planet Earth. We still haven't answered that question. Of the 2 scientific possibilities, there's the organic soup model. The idea that out of the raw materials of planet Earth, we are a chemical anomaly that just life occurred, probably at a deep hydrothermal vent. And from a freakish chemical reaction, life begins. The other possible scientific explanation for the origin is the seed hypothesis, that basically from, at some point, somewhere, a snowball loaded with frozen organisms lands in the ocean, it melts out, and we have ourselves living organisms on a planet that's fully suited for reproduction and evolution. I honestly don't know which one is correct. I think if we are in fact seeded, panspermia, if that is in fact the correct answer to that question, well, just the answer to that question then immediately presents a higher probability of intelligent life being in the universe, meaning that we're clearly not alone, that whatever series of freakish circumstances allowed for the development of intelligence here on Earth, more than likely to be encountered somewhere elsewhere in the universe.
In conclusion, abiogenesis, the thought that life on Earth came to be from many specific chemical reactions, if not true for Earth's beginning, has to have happened somewhere in the universe. If abiogenesis didn't occur on Earth, life would then have to be most likely started from a process called panspermia, where life is transported across the universe on meteoroids and just happens to land here and begin to flourish. The thing is, panspermia most likely could only affect Earth if there were instances of, at the very least, bacteria floating essentially everywhere in space. Reminder that the universe is absolutely massive, which makes planets, solar systems, galaxies, the size of literal atoms spread apart by vast distances. For a meteoroid to just so happen to hit our planet would mean that they are very, very plentiful. With that out of the way, here's our last interview excerpt for Section 1.
A lot of the arguments lack the temporal component of existence. Life is a temporary condition. Let's say that every billion years you get 100 intelligent civilizations, and they have the ability to travel the vastness of the cosmos. They're still going to wind up getting wiped out by, a supernova, a coronal mass ejection, some sort of rogue planet that winds up barreling through their solar system, taking out their home planet, essentially cutting them off from their means, and eventually they're going to succumb. We evolved 2 billion years later. Great, we missed you. I mean, it happens all the time. It's a misconnection. It's not the fact that they weren't there. It's not the fact that we weren't looking for them. I just think in just absolute ocean of time, the chances that these civilizations overlap and are communicative and able to find one another just makes it the literal needle in a haystack. So who knows? There might have been thousands of intelligent civilizations that have evolved over the past 13 billion years, but the odds of them lining up at this exact temporal moment in time with our intelligent civilization now becomes increasingly less probable. We live in an incredibly dynamic universe. It is chaos. And even the most intelligent organisms are still subject to the environment in which they evolved in.
Section 2. Exploration. Now that you have somewhat of a good idea of the scale of the universe, not only space but also time-wise, the question is usually, why can't an advanced civilization just explore the universe? Whether it's by physically going out there or using something like an autonomous spacecraft, why isn't there any evidence of that happening?
The idea of us leaving Earth is at 25,000 miles per hour for humans to leave Earth, and then we can't even travel that fast. Once after that, it's about 17,000 is what like the space shuttle would fly at or travel at. Most of the planets that we talk about that we found, like exoplanets, are usually Neptunian size, which I don't even know what the escape velocity for a planet that size would be, but much, much greater than what I assume our bodies could handle traveling at, which I would assume most life forms would probably struggle at traveling at too. So those are kind of the things that when kids ask about, traveling in just even the solar system is kind of crazy like that. Yeah. But could you use an asteroid and stop there on your way to Mars? And then you're talking about hopping on unlivable things to get to a potentially unlivable thing.
Like the unlivable part of space is just really hard to overcome. Just how much space you have to go through, and the fact that space is literally not sustainable for any life form. Mm-hmm. To make any long trip in space, you need to pack up all your stuff and live.
In class, kids will just even ask, why haven't we even been to Mars? It's the scope that they just don't get. And I say, well, the moon's the closest thing to us, and it still takes at least 7 days travel back and forth time for that. And for a Mars trip, you're looking at 6 months if you're lucky. 9 months is what they usually say it would be really good time.
And then there's radiation in outer space. It's really harmful for life just leaving your planet.
Yeah.
And people don't, yeah, I mean, people don't realize the magnetic field of the Earth shelters us from all that stuff. I mean, you're out in space, you're not sheltered by any of that. So you can be protected by solar radiation, cosmic radiation, all that stuff. So I think it's just really hard.
There's a possibility of existing beyond the capacity that we know it, and that would and could include living in different galaxies and planets that aren't our own and stuff like that. I think what I'm most curious about is when would that actually happen? Like when could we possibly have the technology where Earth is not our only planet? Where else might humans exist that we can get to? How long is it going to take for us to be able to get there? Whether it's the moon, Mars, or something that's multiple light years away, and we have the capacity to say, hey, yeah, let's expend these resources and this technology because we're so comfortable traveling X amount of light years away that we can not only get there, but we can expect to return with information. Like, that's a really, really insane thing to think about, but I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. I just don't know when. I don't know how many years away we are. I don't see it's happening in our lifetime.
Just to space travel, there's no physics way to do it. I mean, even if you can travel, like as you get closer to the speed of light, then that thing gains more mass instead of go faster than the speed of light. So it's a speed limit, and even if we can go at the speed of light, it'll take years, like thousands of years to go anywhere, which I think is just longer than any life form is going to have.
Well, if you think about it, like when I try and use like a class example of things about just exploration in general, like just our own Earth, when we think about the vastness of a continent like Africa, it took us a long time to be able to break down barriers to get to different parts of Africa. And that was just literally in the last century that we could actually go into all of these areas, even though Africa is, according to evidence, the center of life, the cradle of civilization there. It took us hundreds and hundreds of years to be able to get into the depths of what Africa had, the heart of our Africa.
I am a little bit leery of the idea of any form of alien existence really having the best motivations, and it's maybe only because we look at humans, and let's face it, our natural tendencies are to be relatively not nice to each other, and I'm not sure necessarily where that comes from, but I mean, you take any topic, doesn't matter what it is, take something as insignificant as professional sports, and you put two people who live 100 miles away from each other and follow different sports teams in the same room, and they can darn near get into a fist fight over the outcome of a professional sports event. I mean, we have people who die at soccer games because of soccer. Really? So now, I don't know. I mean, I worry about the idea of just sending humans off the planet Earth. I have a feeling that eventually you'd be turning us loose to succumb to our darker side, I guess you would say. I joke all the time about colonizing Mars. Ultimately, as science, the quest to colonize other planets, one, it would ensure the civilization of the human species, or it would doom us to an apocalyptic fate. Because the second you take people from Earth and you send them to Mars, you've now created two separate factions. Rather than it being a mutualistic relationship, I think you're probably going to create an antagonistic relationship. And ultimately, you've created our first, literally, Star Wars. You now have interplanetary warfare. And I don't think it will take long. I honestly think within a matter of 2 or 3 generations, you'll already be looking at planetary conflict. So now we've gone from this great, altruistic, hey, let's preserve the human race, let's make sure that everyone is safe, and you've now created our ultimate apocalyptic doom. I can't see how discovering an alien would do anything other than simply speeding that timeline up. I don't know. I could be completely wrong. I mean, maybe intelligent life forms out there could, show us a better way. But I think our humanity will always get in the way, and it won't be long before there's a split between, hey, aliens are our friends, aliens are our enemies, and now we have conflict, and they might step in and just say, you know what, you're not really worth the effort. Maybe we should just erase you.
Say all that you want about a species spreading to other planets and preserving its life there will be factions. As soon as the first humans are born on Mars, there will be a divide between Earthlings and Martians. Space travel is rough on the human body and psyche. Only the smartest, strongest, and, depending on how the planet decides to format it, richest humans will have the privilege of going to Mars. Their kids will think they're better than those born on Earth, and society will slowly devolve into, as Delta put it, literal Star Wars, planetary conflict. Even if you don't think that scenario is likely, there's so many more ways that society will begin to fall apart once humanity splits. Firstly, Mars and Earth are at most 22 light minutes away from each other, and at least 30 light minutes away. Communication between the two planets will, no matter what, be restricted to something slower than that. And Earth and Mars are, cosmically speaking, super close together. That's besides the point, you may be saying. A civilization can stay together on one planet and just work on improving their technology. Section 3. Technology.
I'd be very curious at the end of your lifespan, 18 years old to 80 years old, like what's going to happen in this next 50-ish years, 60 years, in terms of our technology. Clearly we are advancing, pretty rapidly. Just think of computers in your lifetime.
You think about, it was the 60s when the space exploration really started to take off, and obviously it's just shy of 1970 when we actually reached the moon and stuff like that. And now we're having legitimate conversations of putting humans on the moon. And we've obviously had rovers on Mars that have taken these unbelievable photos and finding signs of maybe something could live here. We have these rock samples, and look at how these samples are not that different. Now, obviously, gravity and the concept of oxygen that's obviously problematic, but it's so hard to imagine that it's not going to happen in the next 100 years. I don't think I'll be alive. Most of the people that are in the high school community probably aren't going to be alive, but I would guess in the inside of 100 years, we're probably going to make some massive leap and be able to travel to places that we just never thought was possible.
Or when you think about exploration on the seas are so vast. And again, in our, history, exploration of the seas really didn't take huge strides until the last couple hundred years. So when you think of it in that kind of a time frame, our ability to actually study space and actually to go beyond is relatively new. When you think about yes, we've been studying the planets, we've been studying the movementary pieces, but to be able to actually send signals out into space, I'm not even sure when the first time we've actually done that. I'm sure I would say the 70s-ish. I don't know the history of it, but just putting it into a context like that, our ability with technological things is only 50 years old-ish, 60 years old. And in the grand scheme, while we have accomplished a lot from our perspective, out there, it may be super primitive still. Maybe we look like the Egyptians and, the pyramids or something. We've done a decent amount, but now there's so much more. When we talk about some of the things with evolutionary, stuff we talk about WHAM or in 20th century, the two classes I teach, space race comes in with 20th century. And even though we don't quite get there into WHAM, the idea of exploration and the idea of manifest destiny of oh, we got to keep going, we got to keep pushing that. I think obviously we're seeing huge gains as you start to see more transparency with NASA, I think you are going to see interesting gains as we look at it as literally the next frontier. And you have Elon with his ventures. You see Bezos with what's his Sky Blue or whatever, the Blue Origins or whatever. Clearly there's a lot of interest and there's a lot of money.
However, we discussed in sections 1 and 2 how near impossible it is to even get out of our solar system and to other planets. Though the Fermi Paradox doesn't just account for meeting alien civilizations, it proposes the question of why we haven't seen any trace of alien life ever. This includes things like satellites, debris, or the more realistic, radio waves. Section 4. Broadcasting. I then asked the teachers what they think of aliens sending something like radio signals or another sort of message to us. Why haven't we heard anything from them?
Maybe they don't see a value in it. Maybe they look back at, us as maybe a very primitive life form. Maybe they're advanced. Maybe our stuff isn't matching up. And, with the mapping pieces, who's to say that they have our world mapped? Maybe we're a speck on the map. Maybe there are other things that take a priority. Maybe there are internal developments or something. And again, I bring it back to history. A lot of times, we've known beyond our own borders, but the ability to actually reach them sometimes takes a back seat when you've got internal growth good ways or internal conflict negative ways. So why haven't they contacted us? Maybe they don't want to, maybe they can't, maybe they've got other things that are more of a priority. Again, I always look for historical kind of examples. And then when I look at history, in more recent pieces, Japan literally felt that they were far superior and they went into self-imposed isolation for 200 years. They literally shut everybody else out because they're we're good. And they were able to develop in isolation and be relatively self-sufficient for those 200 years. Coming out of that then obviously puts them on a very different track, but it is quite possible where they have sent probe pieces out and they're like, nah, we're good, and there's not, or it's not worth it to them. Maybe it's just they're there, but there's nothing that they need, want, or desire. So maybe it's a pullback and they just choose to do their own thing. Maybe they're looking at other places.
No, you're transmitting them, right? But you have to focus it in one direction, right? And even you have to have enough intensity to overcome all the other radiation. The whole universe is always radiating a bunch of other things. That's when we found pulsars for the first time. We thought that was, because it was a unique frequency. We thought that's someone communicating to us, but then we figured out, it's just a planet spinning at some frequency, creating this complex radiation. So I think that's also really hard too, because where do you point it? And then you need it to actually travel, and you need it to overcome to actually get through all the other signals that everything else is sending as well. But once you get to that point, if you ever could actually do that, that's still I still think you're grounded. You can't. It's it's nice. It's like a wave, but you'll never actually meet the other.
Because how long does it take to travel?
But even that light will travel. Maybe someone started sending us signals a million years ago, and it's coming at us. And then when we get it, they're probably all dead. That's just how big, and that's how ridiculously big. Especially if it's coming outside of our galaxy. Say maybe it's unique where it's one works out a galaxy. Maybe it's 1 in 100 million, right? So then maybe we have one life source in every galaxy. What are you gonna do? Because it's gonna take light years, millions of light years, thousands of them to go from galaxy to galaxy. It's just, that's light. That's the fastest thing. So transporting any mass, I just think, impossible.
Section 5. Comfort. With the broadcasting of signals out of the question, and the interviews coming to an end, I asked the teachers, which solution to the Fermi Paradox is the most comforting to you?
Two possibilities exist. Either we are alone in the universe or we are not. Both are equally terrifying.
If I had to choose one, I am most comfortable with option number one, that humans are the only life in the universe, I find that the most comforting. I find that the most secure, the most stable. How's that for a word?
This view of space being too big is like the most comforting to me. Oh, they found us, but we're too stupid. You know, like
Yeah.
like we're just ants to them. They're far superior. Well, I don't like that. You
They're
know?
messing with you.
Yeah. Or if we're the far superior and everything else is ants, like I don't like that's better. You know, some of these are more comforting. Like, you know, is all other life just, you know, simple bacteria? Then that's comforting to me, knowing that I'm not going to go have to fight bacteria for it. I really don't like, you know, oh, they found us, but they don't want to be known, or they know us.
Conclusion. To summarize, transporting anything, whether it be matter, energy, or any form of information, across the cosmos is impossible, at least to the degree where two civilizations can interact, especially within their lifetimes. Life must be common throughout the universe, as it's much too large for there to not be at least something other than us out there. The size of the universe, however, is a double-edged sword. The amount of life in the entirety of the universe is more than we can truly grasp. There are hundreds of thousands of intelligent civilizations with lives just as, if not more complicated than our own. The amount of life that we as a civilization, or any other civilization, of whom their existence will be known, is zero. We will always be alone.